Greetings. I'm here with my friend, Conrad Hughes, who is the head of school for the International School of Los Angeles. Thanks for joining me, Conrad.
Hi, Pedro. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you. I'm sorry you're not going to be there in person this summer when we have educators from around, mostly around California, who are coming together to talk about challenges that they're facing in their schools. One of the challenges that we're all facing is artificial intelligence. As you know, it's changing everything in education. I'm meeting students who write less, who read less, because AI can do it for them. And I'm wondering, as a head of school, how are you approaching that with your faculty as you think about what does it mean to prepare young people at this time?
Well, the first thing is you've got to have a clear position. You've got to have a vision on what AI means to your institution. So we have a policy on artificial intelligence that we drew up using the guardrails and the advice from UNESCO. UNESCO has done some good work on artificial intelligence. We have a kind of mantra, which is technology is where your thinking starts, not where it ends. And we're talking about ethical, critical, and creative use of artificial intelligence. So it's mapped out, it's written down, we've got a roadmap, we know what we're working off. Second, artificial intelligence itself is fast evolving. It's not stable. So I'm very suspicious of these programs that are teaching you about artificial intelligence or how to thrive in an age of artificial intelligence, especially when they're licensed by big tech companies that give you certificates at the end. And often what comes out of that, it's fairly platitudinous. It's like, you have to be a critical thinker.
Yeah.
No, really? I hadn't thought of that.
That's new.
You need to be really creative. Oh, because before we didn't, in the Middle Ages, you probably had to be quite creative as well, right? No, what's really important, it's human-centric skills, as opposed to what? Dog-centric skills? Acting like robots? I mean, come on, obviously. So I think it's important not to fall into platitudes and just to reinforce what we've always been doing. So what we've got here at the International School of Los Angeles, we're very lucky. We've got a director of ed tech who's an expert. She's actually written a doctorate in AI. And we introduce students to AI tutoring in a highly scaffolded environment for 8 lessons in the year in English and maths through this special program that allows them to get AI-generated feedback on a piece of work. And we go through a database that is protected. And the whole thing is curated by our head of ed tech. We're also no phone. We're going no phone next year across the whole board. I mean, we're already pretty tough on phones, but it's phone-free right the way up to 12th grade. And we've also dialed back on our one-to-one computing program. So what we've done is we've said in grades 6 and 7, you get a Chromebook, but you can't take it home. And in grade 8 and 9, you can take it home, but there's a curfew. It actually shuts off at 9 o'clock. And behind all of that, there are pedagogic guidelines for teachers around the way that they look at technology, which is no longer just as something that's there, that's ubiquitous, but as something that should either intentionally drive learning or might interfere with learning. And so that's where the professional development piece comes in. We want the use of tech to be intentional, to be adding value. And you hear all of these throwaway phrases. Well, students need to, deal with the complex problem solving, and so they need to know how to use computers. Most of the time, they're going on a Google Doc and writing an essay.
Right.
You don't really need a computer for that. Now, as they get towards the end of high school, they're doing a lot of internal assessments. They need to be writing and typing because that's just sort of the way the world is. But short of that, we want to push them to write more fine motor skills.
So is that writing that occurs in class?
In class.
So
and homework should be homework that should be. It isn't always. But that's really getting students to think and learn and not just mess around on their Chromebooks and open a bunch of different tabs.
But how about, for example, if you want your student to do a research paper that they can't complete in class, how do you make sure that when they're working on it at home, they're not using AI to write the paper?
Well, there are 3 basic approaches to take. The first is to assume that they will be using AI and to sort of craft your assessments, your command terms around that. if I give you a homework assignment, which is something that can be Googled or can be done by AI, I need to think about how I'm going to assess it. If I'm giving you something that is actually going to require you to think and work yourself, it'll look pretty different. So, for example, if you're intentionally using AI, you might ask students to actually ask AI to write an essay, and then they mark the essay themselves. Or you might ask students you should always make sure that students are quoting AI if they're using it so that it's clear and that ethical standard is there. That's one thing. So it's to create assignments that are taking this into account and to assume that they can access AI. Because AI is kind of embedded in everything. Now, when you go on Google, you're basically getting a kind of AI prompt. Right. And we use AI quite generically, but in a sense, it's been developing.
Spell check is the kind of AI.
Exactly. So it's there. So take that into account. Second is if you really want to make sure that they're not using it, well then, and this is less preferable, you have to go the AI checker route. And so that's plagiarism software, AI software. In the International Baccalaureate, for example, internal assessments go through an AI checker, and it's quite problematic. I had a theory of knowledge student who'd clearly written the essay themselves, who was being accused of writing things through AI, but hadn't. If you think about it statistically, probabilistically, a lot of what you write and say could find some kind of resonance on the web.
Right.
So it's a pretty inaccurate way of measuring. But I think that's connected to your academic honesty policy and clarity with students. You should not be using AI, or yes, you can. Don't be ambiguous about it. And then there's a third one, which is redesigning, especially homework, completely. I'll give you an example of a great homework assignment.
Please.
It's not an essay. It's create a parachute for an object like a pen, because we're going to have a competition at school, which is we'll go onto the first floor of the building and we'll throw all the parachutes off, and the one that lands last wins. Now, you can go and check out the laws of aerodynamics and physics on AI if you want, but you still have to make the thing, and you're going to be working and thinking, and it's fun. Mm-hmm. Telling someone to go and write a very bland essay that they could find online anyway. What's the purpose of it?
Right. So you really have to redesign the kinds of assignments students are being asked to do, so that to ensure that it's not something that AI could do itself.
In theory of knowledge, which is something I've been teaching for years, there's an assessment which is called the exhibition. So students need to choose 3 objects that are of personal significance to them and write about those objects through a prompt, which is a kind of philosophical question. It's almost impossible to cheat on using AI because these are personal objects that have some sort of significance. There's one other thing I'd say, Pedro, which is you can tell when something's been done with AI very, very quickly. The other day, someone sent me a piece of text saying, oh, this is our institution's new white paper on X and Y, and it was about human-centric education in an age of AI and creativity and this and that. And guess what? It was these predictable topic sentences in bold, with a colon systematically, and bullet points with leaders that were about, the impact, the relevance. I wrote back, I said, this is Gemini. Oh, really? I hadn't thought of that. It's like, I don't even need to read the thing. I can see by the form. At least if you're going to try and use Gemini and pretend it's not you, then at least get rid of some of the punctuation, which is so standardized.
Right.
And it's flat. It's boring. You can see straight through it. So I'm quite optimistic at a low level about us being able to navigate our way through this. If what we're looking for
is teachers responding to this challenge of changing the way they approach teaching and learning.
When we said that we're dialing back not dialing back, but we're sort of repositioning ourselves on tech, they're very happy. They need support. It's not fair in teachers to just give students devices and then say, get on with it. But if we're saying, right, you need to shark the computers, you're not taking them home. We want to push you to give assessments where they're reading, for example, studying for a test. I mean, it's not very sort of sexy and all that, because apparently we're in an age where you have to be a creative, critical thinker and, rote learning is bad. But, well, no, I kind of disagree. Get someone to study for a test, they're not going to use AI, or they can if they want. So what? If it helps them.
Right.
When I arrived in California, I had to prepare for my driving test. I was a little bit irritated because, I've got a driving license from Switzerland. They're pretty rigorous. So obviously I went on to AI. And not only did they give me typical questions, but they took me through the routes that you tend to do. I'm not going to deprive myself of that. Why would I?
Right.
And guess what? One of the routes was almost exactly what it had shown me on AI. So I'd prepared for the test, I think intelligently, using technology that was available.
But you still had to do the driving.
I still had to do the test, and I still had to integrate the information. I was just taking shortcuts. My daughter is a junior at a top college in the US, and she was explaining how she'll use AI for some of the really basic groundwork. For example, standardizing your bibliography using APA. I mean, unless you like spending time doing it yourself and you think that that's giving you some kind of benefit. But then ethically, she's not going to actually get AI to do the work instead of her. And by the way, she's in scientific research that's laboratory-based. They're using tech all the time, you see. So it's complex.
Yeah.
But to come back to your question, my answer is you have to have a strong position, you have to have a vision, and you have to have a policy.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. How do your teachers, how are they approaching this? Do you feel like do they understand the challenge that AI poses, and are they changing their pedagogy as a result?
I would say so. I mean, look, teaching is largely subjugated by the curriculum and the standards that we are meant to be teaching to. There's a saying, curriculum coverage is the enemy of learning. So there's a problem right up front there. And if the assessments that are being landed on the plates of teachers are fairly wooden and can be generated using AI, that's not helping them. When you give teachers a bit more agency with some guidelines, making sure that students are actually thinking, making sure that there is discussion in the classroom, making sure that the students are showing that there is some sort of agency and real engagement, they can fly with that. That's been my experience. I think if you have no guidance, and if what they are trying to work through is something that is not fine-tuned to the times we're living in, it's much more difficult for them. Look, a lot of it does fall back on the teacher's decision-making as well. I want to see students doing quite a lot of writing with a pen and paper in the classroom. I teach philosophy. I wasn't able to teach it this year because I started in October coming over to the States for visa reasons. But next year I'm picking the class up again. It's grade 10. They have 4 books that they read. They have a black hard-covered art book with no lines in it so they can draw as well as take notes. I look at the notes they take religiously. And every piece of extended written work that they'll do is handwritten and it's in class. Because if I just give them an assignment and tell them to go and do it at home on a computer, they might not use AI, but they're going to be using something. And they might not even want to, or realize that they're doing it. So that's an example of me deciding as a teacher to push some of my pedagogy in a certain direction.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of teachers, they're aware of the problems of AI as well as some of the benefits. And they're designing.
Can you talk about the benefits? What are some of the ways in which you see teachers using AI that's actually enhanced their teaching?
Well, I mean, fact checking. I remember hearing a story once about, it was, I think, in a Ministry of Education, where there was a complaint about the teacher being disrespected by a student because a student stood up at the back of the classroom and said, "I just checked on Google and what you said was wrong." The teacher got angry with him. Well, let's hold each other accountable because information has been democratized and you're able to go much deeper, much quicker, much more easily on a number of areas. So I think that can help teachers. I think there's also the idea that if you think carefully about AI and you ask yourself how students are going to be using it anyway, it gives you an opportunity in a school to create guardrails. So we were using, well, I'm not going to actually mention what the company is because we're shifting away from them because of data protection issues, but we deliberately chose to only use one semantic field because we felt that their data laws were preferable. And we're actually moving to a different company because we do that background research so that there's some kind of safety. There's also AI tutors, okay, which In some studies, for example, in India and China, where there's a gap in learning that we're trying to catch up in agricultural areas using AI tutors, it's shown, in fact, to have tremendous benefits. So
because it can really personalize to the learning needs.
So an example could be, okay, guys, right now you've all written your essays. I've given you my feedback. And, if a student writes an essay, don't just grade it straight away. First, get them to give themselves a grade. Then show them the comment. Give them the grade last. I mean, these are sort of basic scaffolded steps to make sure that they're thinking about what they're doing, with or with AI. But let's imagine you've gone through the whole cycle of giving them feedback. There might be a loop in there where they're allowed, in your presence, to actually ask whichever AI you're using in your institution to get some feedback, or to run their idea through AI as part of the process just to see what it says. I think discussing AI is important. We're designing a course here on social. It's not really AI, but it's linked on social media. It's called The Anatomy of Truth. It's going to be in 5 parts, and it's run not just by teachers, but some of our parents who are documentary makers and experts in the field. We want students to understand how algorithms work, and the social, emotional hooks that are being created, and some of the dangers of these echo chambers and silos of thought that are self-perpetuating, that are created by algorithms. I think it behooves schools today to teach students a little bit about how knowledge is distributed, primarily through social media, which is heavily affected by AI, to give them that meta-understanding. There's no simple answer. But I think constantly going back to the idea, it's where our thinking starts, it's not where it ends. Because what I don't like is this binary opposite, where either we go tech crazy, and there's AI all over the place, and teachers are getting AI to mark students' work, and data is just being shared left, right, and center, or we try and become monasteries and dig our heads in the sand like ostriches and say we want to make the technology go away. This is a sanctuary where there's no tech. You have to find a middle road.
And, I heard a speaker recently say that AI is a tool, and like any tool, like a scalpel in the hands of a hack can hurt people. In the hands of a master surgeon can do amazing things. And so I guess we want our teachers to be able to use it skillfully in ways that really do enhance what they do. So
I think so. And, you got to line your ducks up in a row. Someone who has the long-term memory, the factual knowledge, dare I say it, some of the experience needed to then go and use AI well. That's a whole different scenario to throwing someone into an AI environment who basically knows nothing.
Right.
So we've still got to roll up our sleeves and do the tougher work of cognitive improvement. And perhaps we need to do it more now than before because we're aware of AI.
Yeah.
English teachers have been complaining about students not reading the books for years. Remember Spark Notes?
Sure.
I mean, there have been these aids out there in the past.
Right. We call them Cliff Notes in the U.S. But
Cliff
same
Notes,
thing.
Spark Notes, and getting your brother or your uncle to write your essay or whatever it is. So these are ethical questions as well at the end of the day.
Sure. I often think that it's going to force us to be much more focused on the evidence of learning. Where's the evidence that our students have really learned? How do we know? And I think that's a really important conversation to have amongst, because in the U.S. at least, we've kind of equated a test score with the evidence of learning. And we know there's so much more that never shows up on a test that has value. So I'm hoping that one of the things it'll force is that we really understand the value of learning and look for that evidence in our classrooms. At least that's my hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Conrad. I appreciate you making time. Sorry you won't be with us in person this summer, but appreciate you sharing your ideas as an educator and a leader in this field with those who are assembled.
Thanks, Pedro. It's been a pleasure.
All right.